मैं हमेशा तुमसे कहता हूँ, लेकिन तुम मेरी बात कभी नहीं सुनते हो। तुम्हें पढ़ाई करनी चाहिए।
नहीं करनी है।
देखो,
ये क्या है?
इसे फ्लो ऑफ टाइम कहते हैं। जब तुम आलस करोगे तो ये टाइम इसी तरह बहकर तुम्हारे ऊपर से यूं ही निकल जाएगा।
वो क्या होता है डोरेमोन?
तुम्हें और समझाना पड़ेगा। तुम तो बिल्कुल भी समझदार नहीं हो नोबिता। और समझदार बनने के लिए तुम्हें पहले पढ़ाई करनी चाहिए, समझ गए?
लेकिन आज टेस्ट के लिए भी ज्यादा अच्छे से पढ़ाई नहीं की थी।
क्या सच में? आज का रिजल्ट क्या होगा?
शायद 0 मिलेगा। मैं कुछ नहीं कर पा रहा हूँ। मुझे सब पता है। मैं कितनी भी कोशिश कर लूँ, लेकिन मुझसे कुछ नहीं होगा।
बुरा मत सोचो।
ये क्या है?
इससे तुम्हें पता लगेगा कि तुम कितना नेगेटिव सोचते हो।
और ये कौन सा गैजेट है?
ये है एम्बॉडीमेंट मिरर। फ्लो ऑफ टाइम की तरह या नेगेटिव इंसान की तरह इस गैजेट में कुछ शब्दों के एक्सप्रेशंस भरे हुए हैं, जिसे तुम गैजेट की मदद से देख सकते हो।
तुमने जो भी कहा मुझे कुछ समझ नहीं आया। ये क्या था डोरेमोन?
एक कहावत है, लोमड़ी की वजह से बुरा होना। ये तुम्हें यही बता रही है।
ये तो मजेदार है। मुझे और ट्राई करना है।
ये खिलौना नहीं है नोबिता। मैंने निकाला था तुम्हें चीजें सिखाने के लिए। रुक जाओ।
मैं इससे बहुत सी चीजें कर सकता हूँ। इसका स्विच ऑन कर देता हूँ।
तुम फिर से खेलने जा रहे हो?
हाँ, मैं जा रहा हूँ मॉम।
तुम पढ़ाई नहीं कर रही हो। मुझे बस इस साल के रिजल्ट का इंतजार है।
दुख हुआ, मुझे बहुत दुख हुआ। मेरे कानों को बहुत ज्यादा दुख हुआ।
इसका मतलब है कि उसके कान खराब होते हैं। ये तो फिर से नेगेटिव बन गया। ला 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 पाए 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 पाए। नोबिता, तुम हमेशा नेगेटिव रहते हो और मुझे तो देखो, मैं हमेशा कितना ज्यादा खुश और हंसता रहता हूँ। आज भी 2 लोगों ने मुझे अपने साथ खाने पर आने के लिए कहा है। अब मैं इस कंफ्यूजन में हूँ, मैं किसके साथ जाऊँ? हाँ, अरे मैं लाल हो गया।
इसका मतलब है ये?
इसका मतलब ये झूठ कह रहा है। झूठ नहीं है, ये सच है। अचानक हम नोबिता चमकने लगा। तुम कितना क्यों खुश हो रहे हो?
अरे तुम यहाँ हो? अरे तुम दोनों इतने लाल और इतने चमकदार क्यों लग रहे हो? खुशखबरी है, अब से ग्राउंड पर बेसबॉल की स्पेशल ट्रेनिंग होगी। बॉल अच्छे से पकड़ना। तुम सब क्या कर रहे हो? अच्छे से पकड़ो।
ये वाकई सब बेकार है।
मैं इतनी तेज बॉल नहीं पकड़ सकता हूँ। जियान,
क्या हुआ सुनियो?
मुझे तुम्हारे बगल में खड़े होकर तुम्हें शानदार स्विंग करते हुए देखना है। क्योंकि मैं अपनी प्रैक्टिस स्विंग की जगह तुमसे 100 गुना ज्यादा अच्छे से सीख सकता हूँ ना।
ठीक है सुनियो, अब तुम कैचर हो।
अरे वाह जियान।
तैयार हो जाओ।
अच्छे से पकड़ना, ठीक है? ये लो।
क्या कर रहे हो? बॉल सही से पकड़ो।
सही से पकड़ो ना, सही से पकड़ो। जियान, तुम वाकई किसी भी खिलाड़ी से कम नहीं हो।
क्या सच में सुनियो?
हाँ, मैं सच कह रहा हूँ। तुम बड़े बड़े मैच भी खेल सकते हो, मस्का लगाओ।
चलो भी सुनियो, मुझे अब शर्म आ रही है। हाँ, वाकई बेसबॉल में किसी भी मैच में कभी भी कोई मुझसे जीत ही नहीं सकता है।
जियान तो
पिघल गया और बेवकूफ बन गया। हाँ, खिलाड़ी।
सुनियो उसे क्या कह रहा होगा?
वो जरूर उसे मस्का लगा रहा होगा।
मस्का?
तुम जैसे नासमझ से निपटना बहुत आसान होता है। जब तुम किसी से झूठ बोलते हो और वो खुश हो जाते हैं, तो उसे मस्का लगाना कहते हैं नोबिता।
तुमने मुझसे झूठ कहा?
अरे वाह जियान, तुम तो ना।
यो,
मेरा दोस्त अब आगे जाकर बड़े बड़े मैच खेलने वाला है। ये देखकर मैं बहुत खुश हूँ।
तुम इतना मस्का क्यों लगा रहे हो?
अरे नहीं जियान, मैं तो सच में पूरे मन से तुम्हारी इतनी अच्छी अच्छी तारीफ कर रहा हूँ। हाँ।
लेकिन तुम लाल हो रहे हो।
तुम झूठ कह रहे हो।
मेरा मजाक उड़ाने की तुम्हारी हिम्मत कैसे हुई?
ये तो बहुत मजेदार गैजेट है। अरे हाँ, मैं अभी जाके ये गैजेट शिजुका को भी दिखाता हूँ।
जी तो फिर से चमकने लगा।
शिजुका! देखी सुकी,
लगता नहीं कि आज के टेस्ट में मेरे 90 मार्क्स आ पाएंगे। देखी सोगी तुम्हारे तो पूरे मार्क्स आएंगे ना?
मैं कोशिश तो पूरी करता हूँ, लेकिन
मुझे भी तुम्हारी तरह हमेशा फुल मार्क्स चाहिए।
ऐसा मत कहो शिजुका।
ये क्या हो रहा है डोरेमोन?
ये बुरा लगने की आग है।
मैं जल रहा हूँ, मैं जल रहा हूँ। बहुत गर्म है, बहुत गर्म है, बहुत गर्म है। बहुत ज्यादा गर्म है पानी।
अरे नहीं, प्लीज मुझे माफ कर दो।
नहीं, मैं तो बच गया।
हाँ?
डोरेमोन, कभी कभी मैं सोचता हूँ शिजुका डेकिसुकी के साथ इतना क्यों रहती है।
तुम बहुत जल्दी नेगेटिव हो जाते हो नोबिता।
वो पढ़ाई में अच्छा है, स्पोर्ट्समैन भी है, समझदार है, वो बहुत अच्छा लड़का है। मैं उसके सामने कुछ नहीं। इसका मतलब क्या है डोरेमोन?
इसका मतलब होता है कि दुख की गहराई में गिर जाना।
अरे हाँ, ये मुझ पर भी लागू होता है ना।
बस थोड़ा सा। चलो वापस घर चलते हैं।
पता नहीं, मेरा शरीर बहुत भारी हो गया है।
हमारा शरीर भारी नहीं होता, हमारा मन भारी हो जाता है।
अरे हाँ, इसे कहते हैं मन का भारी होना। और जिस तरह से मैं चल रहा हूँ उसे कहते हैं कांटों भरा रास्ता।
तुम अच्छी चीजें नहीं सोच रहे हो नोबिता, थोड़ी सी शांत हो जाओ प्लीज। तुम्हें अच्छी चीजों के बारे में सोचना होगा।
मैं नहीं सोच पा रहा, पूरी दुनिया अंधेरे में है।
नोबिता चलो।
मुझे अकेला छोड़ दो।
लेकिन अगर
तुम कभी भी मेरी बात नहीं समझते, चले जाओ डोरेमोन।
पर नोबिता,
कोई भी मुझे नहीं समझता। मुझे ऐसा लगता है जैसे मैं बहुत ज्यादा अकेला हूँ। मैं सबसे दुखी इंसान हूँ।
रुक जाओ, तुम वाकई बहुत दुखी होने वाले हो नोबिता, रुक जाओ।
ये क्या कर रहे हो डोरेमोन? रुक जाओ।
मैं तुम्हें ऐसे ही छोड़ नहीं सकता नोबिता।
तुम लोग यहाँ सुबह के वक्त इतने अंधेरे में शोर क्यों कर रहे हो?
सर आप?
ये तो नोबिता की आवाज है। अच्छी बात है, तुमसे बात करनी थी।
मेरा रिजल्ट अच्छा नहीं, इसलिए आप मुझे डांटने आए हैं ना?
क्यों डांटूंगा? तुम जानते हो तुम्हें कितने मार्क्स मिले हैं?
पता नहीं, लेकिन मुझे हमेशा जो सही जवाब लगता है वो आखिर में गलत ही निकलता है।
लेकिन तुमने इस बार ज्यादा गलतियां नहीं की हैं। तुम्हें मिले हैं 65 मार्क्स। तुम कभी कभी तो अच्छी पढ़ाई करते हो।
65 मार्क्स?
अब इससे क्या हो गया?
ये सातवें आसमान में उड़ रहा है सर।
ओह अच्छा।
इसे कहते हैं खुशी में चलना।
हाँ, मैं जानता हूँ।
हाँ, ये प्लम का फूल है। ये तो
वो तो दिख रहा है।
और यहाँ भी है। हाँ, ये अच्छा लग रहा है। हवा?
क्या हवा?
मुझे कल से कुछ अलग लग रहा है। शायद कोई तो पास आ रहा है। शायद उसके बहुत बड़े बड़े कदम है।
वो क्या है? मुझे कुछ दिखाई नहीं दे रहा, लेकिन कोई बड़ा लग रहा है।
फिर से वही हवा।
शायद कोई आने वाला होगा।
The first reports came from the front lines at dawn, when Russian troops began sharing raw battlefield accounts that contradicted months of official optimism. A main battle tank, long promoted as a symbol of modern strength, had failed repeatedly under real combat pressure. Crews described systems that looked impressive in demonstrations but struggled in mud, urban ruins, and constant drone surveillance. The story spread quickly among soldiers, not as propaganda, but as frustrated truth. As the fighting intensified, tank crews found themselves exposed rather than protected. Advanced optics failed in poor weather, communication systems lagged at critical moments, and defensive features proved unreliable against modern anti-tank weapons. Soldiers were forced to abandon vehicles that were supposed to dominate the battlefield, retreating on foot, while enemy drones hovered above. What was meant to inspire confidence instead became a source of anxiety. Mechanics working near the front quietly confirmed the problem. Repairs took too long, spare parts were scarce, and even minor damage could disable the tank completely. In theory, it was a machine built for modern warfare. In practice, it demanded perfect conditions that simply did not exist in combat. Each breakdown added to the growing sense that something fundamental had been overlooked. Rumors soon turned into open conversation among troops. Soldiers compared notes, sharing experiences of near misses and narrow escapes. Many admitted they trusted older, simpler equipment more than the flagship tank they were ordered to use. The contrast between official claims and battlefield reality became impossible to ignore, and morale suffered as expectations collapsed. News of these failures began to leak beyond the front lines. Analysts and observers pieced together the scattered accounts, noting how modern warfare had shifted faster than the tank's design philosophy. Drones, precision strikes, and real-time intelligence had changed the rules, and the once feared armored giant seemed unprepared for this new environment. By the end of the story, the tank was no longer seen as a symbol of dominance, but as a lesson in overconfidence. Russian troops, facing the consequences firsthand, had exposed a harsh reality. In modern combat, reputation means little without adaptability. The battlefield had delivered its verdict, and it was far more unforgiving than any military parade. The first reports came from the front lines at dawn, spreading quietly among exhausted units before anyone at headquarters could shape the narrative. Russian troops returning from overnight engagements spoke in low voices about a battle tank that had promised dominance but delivered disappointment. On paper and in televised parades, it was presented as a revolutionary machine, capable of surviving anything the battlefield could throw at it. In real combat, however, the story unfolding among soldiers was far less impressive. Crews described how the tank struggled from the moment it entered contested zones, bogging down in soft terrain and revealing its position long before it could engage the enemy. What shocked many soldiers was not just a single failure, but a pattern. During intense fighting, systems that were advertised as next generation proved unreliable under stress. Sensors malfunctioned, targeting systems lagged, and coordination with infantry units often broke down at critical moments. Troops began to realize that what looked flawless during controlled exercises could not handle the chaos, dust, electronic interference, and constant threat posed by modern warfare. Enemy drones hovered relentlessly overhead, turning the tank into a visible and vulnerable target rather than a shield of protection. As these accounts spread, frustration replaced initial disbelief. Some soldiers admitted they felt safer outside the tank than inside it, a thought that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. The machine that was meant to boost morale instead raised doubts about leadership decisions and battlefield preparedness. Without official statements, the truth moved soldier to soldier, fueled by first-hand experience rather than rumor. By sunrise, it was clear that something deeply troubling had been exposed, not by foreign analysts or enemy propaganda, but by the troops who were expected to trust their lives to the tank in combat. As the fighting intensified, The reality inside the armored units grew even darker. Crews who once believed the tank would give them an edge quickly learned that it often did the opposite. In fast-moving combat, the vehicle struggled to react in time, its systems overwhelmed by the speed and complexity of the battlefield. When enemy positions shifted suddenly, delays in targeting and coordination left crews exposed for precious seconds that felt like minutes. Those moments were enough for modern anti-tank weapons to strike. The sense of vulnerability was constant. Soldiers described the psychological pressure of knowing they were being watched from above, with drones circling silently and feeding real-time information to enemy units. Instead of feeling like hunters, tank crews felt like targets trapped inside a loud, heat-emitting shell. Defensive measures that were supposed to counter these threats often failed to activate correctly or proved ineffective against repeated attacks. Each engagement chipped away at the confidence that armored warfare was supposed to inspire. Urban combat made the situation even worse. Narrow streets, rubble, and damaged infrastructure limited movement, turning the tank into an awkward and predictable presence. Infantry support was often delayed or scattered, leaving crews isolated. When missiles struck nearby, even without direct hits, shockwaves and debris damaged external systems, forcing crews to retreat or abandon their positions entirely. The tank's size and weight, once seen as strengths, became liabilities. In private conversations, soldiers admitted that fear had replaced pride. They followed orders, but with growing hesitation, aware that survival depended more on luck than technology. The gap between the tank's reputation and its performance became impossible to ignore. What was meant to dominate the battlefield instead revealed how modern warfare punishes rigidity and how quickly confidence can collapse when protection turns into exposure. Behind the front lines, the pressure shifted to the mechanics and support crews tasked with keeping the tank operational. Their workspaces were crowded with damaged vehicles bearing the marks of combat, many disabled by problems that should have been manageable. What alarmed them most was how quickly small issues escalated into major failures. A damaged sensor, a jammed system, or a minor electronic fault could render the entire tank useless, forcing crews to pull it out of action when it was needed most. Repair teams spoke quietly about design choices that seemed disconnected from battlefield reality. Accessing critical components often required time, tools, and conditions that simply did not exist near active fighting. Spare parts were limited, and replacements for specialized systems were slow to arrive, if they arrived at all. In some cases, tanks were cannibalized for parts, leaving more vehicles sidelined just to keep a few running. The process felt less like maintaining a modern weapon and more like managing a fragile prototype under constant stress. As days passed, frustration grew. Mechanics worked long hours under threat of attack, knowing that even their best efforts might only return a tank to service briefly before it failed again. Soldiers waiting for repairs watched valuable time slip away, aware that every delay increased the risk to units still engaged at the front. Confidence in the tank's reliability eroded further with each breakdown. Conversations among support crews revealed a shared concern. The machine demanded ideal conditions, but war offered none. Dust, mud, vibration, and electronic interference exposed weaknesses that training manuals never addressed. The battlefield was unforgiving, and the tank's complexity worked against it. What emerged was a quiet understanding that no amount of skill could fully compensate for a system unprepared for the harsh realities of sustained combat. As these experiences accumulated, the silence among the troops slowly broke. What began as whispered complaints turned into open discussions during brief rests and shared meals. Soldiers compared stories, realizing that the problems they faced were not isolated incidents, but part of a wider pattern. Tank crews from different units described the same failures, the same moments of panic, and the same feeling of betrayal by equipment they had been told to trust without question. The realization was unsettling, because it confirmed that the issue was systemic rather than accidental. Many soldiers spoke about the emotional toll this knowledge took on them. Training had taught them to believe that advanced technology would compensate for danger, that the tank was a shield against the chaos of war. Now that belief was gone. Some admitted they felt more confident operating older, simpler vehicles or even moving on foot with infantry support. The flagship tank, once a source of pride, had become something they approached with caution and doubt. This shift in attitude affected morale in subtle but powerful ways. Orders were still followed, but enthusiasm faded. Crews hesitated longer before advancing, weighing risks more carefully than before. Trust in official briefings weakened as soldiers relied more on each other's experiences than on promises from above. The gap between what they were told and what they lived through each day widened. In these conversations, blame was rarely shouted. Instead, it was expressed through quiet disappointment and resignation. Soldiers understood that they were paying the price for decisions made far from the battlefield. The shared acknowledgement of the tank's limitations created a bond among them, but it also exposed a deeper issue. Confidence in leadership and strategy was eroding. Once that confidence cracked, rebuilding it became far harder than repairing any damaged machine. As word of these failures spread beyond the front lines, fragments of the story began to reach analysts, observers, and independent commentators. They pieced together accounts from soldiers, intercepted communications, and visual evidence from the battlefield. What emerged was a picture very different from official statements. The tank's struggles were not being framed as isolated mishaps, but as symptoms of a deeper mismatch between design expectations and the realities of modern warfare. Each new detail reinforced the sense that something fundamental had gone wrong. Observers noted how quickly the battlefield had evolved. Drones, real-time intelligence sharing, and precision-guided weapons had transformed combat into a constant test of adaptability. Heavy armor alone was no longer enough to guarantee survival. The tank, designed to project power and resilience, appeared outpaced by threats that were cheaper, faster, and harder to detect. Analysts argued that visibility and complexity had become weaknesses, especially when opponents could exploit them with coordinated strikes. The contrast between official imagery and battlefield reality drew increasing attention. Promotional footage showed the tank moving confidently across open terrain, while combat recordings revealed vehicles damaged, abandoned, or struggling to maneuver. The discrepancy raised uncomfortable questions about how military success was being measured and communicated. Trust in carefully managed narratives weakened as first-hand accounts gained credibility. For many watching from afar, the tank became a case study rather than just a weapon. It represented the risks of over-reliance on prestige projects and symbolic strength. The battlefield was exposing lessons that no simulation could fully predict. Modern conflict rewarded flexibility, integration, and resilience over sheer presence. As these insights circulated, the story took on a broader meaning. It was no longer just about a single tank or a single campaign. It was about how quickly assumptions could collapse under pressure and how the realities of war had a way of revealing truths that official voices struggled to contain. By the end of the story, the tank's image had fundamentally changed, not only among soldiers, but also in the wider understanding of modern conflict. What was once presented as a symbol of technological dominance now stood as a reminder of how unforgiving real combat can be. The battlefield had stripped away marketing, slogans, and carefully staged displays, leaving only performance and survival as measures of success. In that environment, reputation carried no armor. For the troops who had relied on the tank, the lesson was deeply personal. They learned that adaptability mattered more than promises, and that no machine, no matter how advanced it appeared, could compensate for flawed assumptions. War demanded systems that could endure chaos, improvisation, and constant pressure. When those demands were not met, even the most celebrated equipment became a liability rather than an advantage. Strategically, the exposure carried long-term consequences. Military planners were forced to confront uncomfortable questions about priorities, procurement, and doctrine. Investing heavily in prestige platforms without fully accounting for evolving threats had proven risky. The experience highlighted the growing importance of integration, support, and flexibility over sheer size or symbolism. It also showed how quickly the balance could shift when opponents exploited weaknesses with creativity and speed. Beyond tactics and technology, the story revealed something more enduring: trust between soldiers and their equipment, between troops and leadership, was fragile. Once broken, it could not be restored through speeches or parades. Confidence had to be earned through reliability under fire, not through claims made far from danger. In the end, the tank was no longer just a machine discussed in military terms. It became a cautionary tale. Modern warfare had delivered its verdict without hesitation, exposing the cost of overconfidence and outdated thinking. The battlefield had spoken clearly, and its message was impossible to ignore. Survival belongs to those who evolve faster than the war itself.